Death of an Innocent. How Christopher McCandless Lost His Way in the Wilds by Jon Krakauer. The following is an excerpt from Jon Krakauer's celebrated book, Into the Wild, which originally appeared in Outside Magazine, January 1993. James Gallion had driven 5 miles out of Fairbanks when he spotted the hitchhiker standing in the snow beside the road, thumb raised high, shivering in the gray Alaskan dawn. A rifle protruded from the young man's pack, but he looked friendly enough. A hitchhiker with a Remington semi-automatic isn't the sort of thing that gives motorists pause in the 49th state. Gallion steered his 4x4 onto the shoulder and told him to climb in. The hitchhiker introduced himself as Alex. Alex, Gallion responded, fishing for a last name. Just Alex, the young man replied, pointedly rejecting the bait. He explained that he wanted to ride as far as the edge of Denali National Park, where he intended to walk deep into the bush and live off the land for a few months. Alex's backpack appeared to weigh only 25 or 30 pounds, which struck Gallion as an accomplished outdoorsman as an improbably light load for a 3-month sojourn in the backcountry, especially so early in the spring. Immediately, Gallion began to wonder if he'd picked up one of those crackpots from the lower 48 who come north to live out their ill-considered Jack London fantasies. Alaska had long been a magnet for unbalanced souls, often outfitted with little more than innocence and desire, who hoped to find their footing in the unsullied enormity of the last frontier. The bush, however, is a harsh place and cares nothing for hope or longing. More than a few such dreamers have met predictably unpleasant ends. As they got to talking during the 3-hour drive, though, Alex didn't strike Gallion as your typical misfit. He was congenial, seemed well-educated, and peppered Gallion with sensible questions about what kind of game lived in the country, what kind of berries he could eat, that kind of thing. Still, Gallion was concerned. Alex's gear seemed excessively slight for the rugged conditions of the interior bush, which in April still lay buried under the winter snowpack. He admitted that the only food in his pack was a 10-pound bag of rice. He had no compass. The only navigational aid in his possession was a tattered road map he'd scrounged at a gas station. And when they arrived where Alex asked to be dropped off, he left the map in Gallion's truck, along with his watch, his comb, and all his money, which amounted to 85 cents. "I don't want to know what time it is," Alex declared cheerfully. "I don't want to know what day it is or where I am. Nothing of that matters." Page 2. During the drive south toward the mountains, Gallion had tried repeatedly to dissuade Alex from his plan. To no avail. He even offered to drive Alex all the way to Anchorage so that he could at least buy the kids some decent gear. "No, thanks anyway," Alex replied. "I'll be fine with what I've got." When Gallion asked whether his parents or some friend knew what he was up to, anyone who could sound the alarm if he got into trouble and was overdue, Alex answered calmly that, no, nobody knew of his plans. That in fact he hadn't spoken to his family in nearly 3 years. "I'm absolutely positive," he assured Gallion. "I won't run into anything I can't deal with on my own." There was just no talking the guy out of it, Gallion recalls. He was determined. He couldn't wait to head out of there and get started. So Gallion drove Alex to the head of the Stampede Trail, an old mining tract that begins 10 miles west of the town of Healy, convinced him to accept a tuna melt and a pair of rubber boots to keep his feet dry, and wished him luck. Alex pulled a camera from his backpack and asked Gallion to snap a picture of him. Then, smiling broadly, he disappeared down the snow-covered trail. The date was Tuesday, April 28, 1992. More than 4 months passed before Gallion heard anything more of the hitchhiker. His real name turned out to be Christopher J. McCandless. He was the product of a happy family from an affluent suburb of Washington, D.C. And although he wasn't burdened with a surfeit of common sense and possessed a streak of stubborn idealism, that did not readily mesh with the realities of modern life. He was no psychopath. McCandless was in fact an honors graduate of Emory University, an accomplished athlete, and a veteran of several solo excursions into wild, inhospitable terrain. An extremely intense young man, McCandless had been captivated by the writing of Tolstoy. He particularly admired the fact that the great novelist had forsaken a life of wealth and privilege to wander among the destitute. For several years he had been emulating the Count's asceticism and moral rigor to a degree that astonished and occasionally alarmed those who knew him well. When he took leave of James Gallion, McCandless entertained no illusions that he was trekking into Club Med. Peril, adversity, and Tolstoyan renunciation were what he was seeking, and that is precisely what he found on the Stampede Trail, in spades. For most of 16 weeks, McCandless more than held his own. Indeed, were it not for one or two innocent and seemingly insignificant blunders, he would have walked out of the Alaskan woods in July or August as anonymously as he walked into them in April. Instead, the name of Chris McCandless had become the stuff of tabloid headlines, and his bewildered family is left clutching the shards of a fierce and painful love. On the northern margin of the Alaska Range, just before the hulking escarpments of Denali and its satellite surrender to the low Kantishna Plain, a series of lesser ridges known as the Outer Ranges sprawls across the flats like a rumpled blanket on an unmade bed. Between the flinty crests of the two outermost outer ranges runs an east-west trough, maybe 5 miles across, carpeted in a boggy amalgam of muskeg, alder thickets, and scrawny spruce, meandering through this tangled, rolling bottomland in the Stampede Trail, the route Chris McCandless followed into the wilderness.